Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning, I'm Jeff Kellam. Welcome to this week's edition of Encounter. I'm the Parish Associate at the Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott. When I was growing up across the street from the church, actually, as a kid, the only celebrities in town were DJs. But they were important to us. They entertained us after school and evenings, and one of the local DJs here in Binghamton was Thomas Michael Whalen. And when I went into radio, I kind of liked that idea of all three names. Thomas Michael Whalen became Tom Whalen, and he wound up in New York City in the big time. So I used my whole name. I'm Jeffrey Stanton Kellam. Stanton was my grandmother's maiden name. And yes, Elizabeth Cady Stanton's in our family tree. So I was particularly interested in a play that's opening at the Franklin Stage Company. It's been a couple of performances now, and it will be running through July 28th. It's called Possessing Harriet. And Harriet Powell's life intersects with that of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. My guest today is the director of Possessing Harriet, about a mixed-race slave who escaped slavery in Syracuse, Leslie Noble. Welcome.
Thank you.
So you are the director of the play. You are also kind of in the administration of the Franklin Stage Company.
Yes, yes. So, I help run the joint, as it were.
That's right. You and Patricia?
Yes, Patricia Buckley.
Buckley.
We are co-artistic directors of Franklin Stage Company.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Now, Franklin is what, an hour east of Binghamton?
Yes, just under an hour.
Yep. So it's one of many places where we can go to see good theater. It's professional stage. It's not local actors necessarily.
Yes, yes. Our actors are members of the Actors Equity Union.
Wonderful.
And our stage managers too. Yes.
So you can see why I was interested in this play.
Yes. That's incredible.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me about how you found the play. Let's start there.
Well, the playwright, Kyle Bass, is a colleague of mine at Syracuse University. And he was commissioned by Greg Tripoli of the Onondaga Historical Association to create a piece about this true incident, about the escape of Harriet Powell. I guess this occurred in 1839, and it was big news. She was, as you mentioned, a young mixed-race slave who was brought north by her captors, who came to Syracuse to visit friends, and they were celebrated as part of the social season. Everybody wanted, to see them.
Right.
Parties were held in their honor. Right. And a free man of color who was working in the hotel approached her one day and said, "Are you a slave?" And she was terrified, but she says in the play, "I was so scared I couldn't even answer him." It had never been a question before.
Sure.
And she thought he was a slave too. Yeah. Slavery had been abolished in New York State, I think 12 years prior to that. But this man, his name was Thomas Leonard, arranged her escape with the help of other abolitionists in Syracuse, and she ended up right before the final leg of her journey to Canada. She ended up in the home of Garrett Smith, who was a famous abolitionist at the time, and he was at the same time entertaining his young cousin, who was Elizabeth Cady, just before she became Elizabeth Cady Stanton. In fact, she met Henry Stanton, who was also a guest at the home, I think on this very same visit. Yeah. So she writes about meeting this young woman in her memoirs, and says that the conversation stayed with her all those years, and that she was moved to tears by the story of Harriet's life, but she doesn't give many more details, or any more details really, about what they spoke about.
Sure.
So Kyle got to imagine this conversation, and that's how he came to write the play. And I was fortunate enough to observe the early workshops of the play and see it through its development up until last year, when it premiered at Syracuse Stage as part of their season.
Wow.
And yeah, directed by Tazewell Thompson.
Yeah.
And it was just a stunning production.
Yeah.
So
A three-person play?
it's a four-person play. Thomas Leonard, the man who first approaches Harriet Powell, Elizabeth Cady, and Garrett Smith. He makes an appearance too, a very important appearance at the beginning and at the end.
Sure.
Yeah.
The play itself is based on, in fact,
Yes.
but with the playwright's license
Yes.
to imagine the conversations that took place.
Yes.
But a very important story to continue to tell.
Yeah, and Kyle, we text weekly, back and forth.
Right.
He speaks so movingly and passionately about writing this play, and says it's not. He says, I wasn't interested in making it a museum piece. I wrote it to interrogate our present and how the legacy of slavery and inequality impacts where we are today in our struggle with racism and inequality. So it really, when we were auditioning actors for the play, 201, especially the women, came in and said, this play is so relevant. These are issues that women of color and white women are confronting now. These are issues of equality and racial justice that are right at the forefront. So it feels very, very fresh, even though it's still set in 1839.
Sure.
Yeah.
When you read the playwright's words, you had seen the play, so it was developing. It wasn't as if you read the script and it was your first.
Right.
When you now begin to think about your own production of it and you start casting the actors, what are some of the things that you take into consideration with their backgrounds and their understanding? Do you talk about the things they've experienced in their lives? Does that feed into the production?
Well, I think that several considerations go into producing and casting the size of our theater. You know, from the size and intimacy of our theater in Chapel Hall to to very logistical things like. Do we have the budget to hire a casting director? You know, those kinds of decisions. But also, I was fortunate enough to speak with Kyle about actors that he had seen and actors that he knows who he thinks might be a good fit for the roles, and it just. I don't know. We're so fortunate to have the cast that we have, who during the audition, really brought such passion and commitment to their just even to the audition, to the sides that we had given them. And then what I like to do in an audition is speak a little bit with the actors afterwards and sort of draw out what they think about the piece or how they feel about the piece, because sometimes an actor, and this happens to all professional actors, is they go in, they're not even certain they really like the play, but are open to the possibility of being cast, and then also might think, oh, this would be a great thing to do. It might get me someplace else, and somebody else might see it, or this is a really good director I want to work with. Maybe I don't love the play, but it was important to me and to Patricia too that people connected to the play and loved the play. I think as much as we did. I think it's important to be open to that journey. So.
the finding an African American to play the role of a slave who now looks at freedom.
Yes.
I mean, it is a story that still strikes because people still don't feel free.
Yes. Yes.
So are there personal emotions and feelings that come to mind that maybe need to be pushed away in order for the actor to play the role?
Yeah, I think it's a delicate balance between connecting emotionally with what the character has been through, and also not letting your emotions control or overtake what the story is trying to say, or what will serve the play. So it's, that's my job as a director, is to create the conditions under which actors can explore emotionally their connection to the text, and also, but not indulge, always keeping the intention of the playwright and the focus of the moment or the story at the forefront.
Yeah.
So that's that, and it takes 3-4 weeks to figure that out.
And what an interesting thing to think that this has a local connection. We've heard these stories. There are rumors of Underground Railroad sites throughout upstate New York.
Yes.
Some of them prove to be untrue. Someone has found a room in a basement, and it turns out that it was used.
Yeah.
But here is a Syracuse connection with a story that one might have thought would take place in Virginia or North Carolina.
Yes. Yes.
How did he find this story? Do you know?
Well, I think initially this story, I think the director of the Onondaga Historical Association found it in the archives because there was a reward poster printed, $200 reward for the return of this girl. Wow. And at the time, it was in all the newspapers. Yeah. And so there was that connection. And then this Peterborough connection, which is where Garrett Smith's estate was, and still is. There is an abolitionist museum in Peterborough. So Kyle connected, as part of his research, with Norman Dan and Dorothy Wilsey of the Garrett Smith Estate and Abolitionist Museum in Peterborough, New York, and was able to walk the grounds. His actual home burned down in the 30s, I think, but the barn and the land office are still there. So myself and my designer went out there, set designer, just to walk the grounds that Harriet and many other escaped slaves would have walked. We were in the barn, and it was, it was just chilling. This is where the horses were made ready for her final escape. This is the land office where they planned her escape. I was saying to Kyle, you read the history as kids, and because Syracuse also has a kind of storied abolitionist past, I naively thought, Syracuse was an abolitionist stronghold. Yeah. Everybody in Syracuse was for abolition. And the truth is that these people were hated. Most people
was upsetting the status quo.
Yes, interested in keeping the status quo, because Northerners benefited from the institution. Their textile mills, the cotton, the sugar, the products came back to be finished in the North and sold. So, that was quite a surprise to me that, vocal as they were a vocal minority. Yes. And similarly, a little bit later in years than this story takes place, similarly with women's equality, the ideas that fueled the first convention at Seneca Falls. Just for a woman to speak in public was scandalous, and they were pilloried in the press, So just the courage of the abolitionists and these, rebels in petticoats, as they were, sometimes derided, was really fascinating. Yeah. Also, the fact that many freed Black people that freed black people were just as involved in the abolitionist cause, maybe even more so, as the people that we hear about, you know,
Yes.
as the white people that we hear about being abolitionists. So quite a network.
We look at them as heroes today,
Yeah.
but in their day they were rebellious.
They were, and reviled.
Yeah.
But, and there's a wonderful kind of piece in the play where Harriet's trying to put together Elizabeth's stance on it, because surprisingly, she's not, you know, she knows theoretically that slavery is wrong, but she's not convinced by any of the abolitionist arguments of the day.
She's far more interested in women's rights.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she, you know, she has racist blind spots, you know, like we, well, what are we going to do with them once they're free?
Yeah.
What will they do?
Yeah.
You know, it fills me with fear.
Yeah.
Some people say send them back to Africa, and there's a really intense argument between Thomas and Elizabeth, where he counters all of her arguments, sort of with a, you know, Kyle based him in part because there was the least amount of information about Thomas Leonard,
Right.
but he bases his character on the story of his own great-great-grandfather, who was named Tolliver Holmes, who escaped slavery in Virginia, made it to New York, served in the Union Army as part of what was called the Colored Troops,
Yep.
and then settled in Delhi, where Kyle has had ancestors, free black folks, settled in Delhi since the late 1790s.
Gosh.
Incredible connections all around locally,
Yeah.
you know?
And I don't remember reading this history when I was growing up,
Yeah.
locally.
Yes.
It was, we learned about Gloversville. We knew about shoes, but
Yeah.
this story was not part of the curriculum.
Yeah.
The story we're talking about is written by Kyle Bass. He's the playwright. The play is called Possessing Harriet, and it's about Harriet Powell, a mixed-race slave who escaped in Syracuse at the invitation of
Thomas Leonard.
Thomas Leonard. And the director of the play and a member of the Franklin Stage Company is with us today, Leslie Noble. Let me just ask about the Franklin Stage Company.
Sure.
Because now this is playing at Franklin Stage Company, Franklin, New York. And it's playing July 12th, past, but through the 28th. Performance schedules are, I'm reading off my notes.
That's fine.
Thursday and Fridays at 7:30, Saturdays at 3 and 7:30, and then Sundays at 5. And there are 2 talkback sessions.
Yes.
Now, Joan and I are going to one of those,
Oh,
but one will
excellent.
be July 19th and the 26th. That, I enjoy talkbacks after meaningful plays.
Yeah.
What led to having a talkback session?
Well, Patricia and I became the artistic directors of Franklin Stage Company in 2017, and the present or the then artistic director was a member of the founding family, and so we knew we had big shoes to fill, you know, because they had built this foundation of quality professional theater and community, really, you know, a community service over 20 years. So we strategized and thought, well, I was fairly new to the community. Pat had been on the board for a couple of years and had been a performer at Franklin Stage Company for several years. So we started to think, well, how can we connect now with this wonderful supportive audience? How can we introduce ourselves and listen to their reactions? And so we thought instituting talkbacks for our produced shows, because we both produce shows from the ground up, run them for 3 weeks, and then we also present shows artists that have shows that are completed that we present for a long weekend. So we thought, how can we do that? And we were interested in what the community thought. Yeah. So we started Friday night talkbacks, and you know, for definitely for our produced shows and for some of our visiting artists too, and just the feedback that we received and the questions that we had and the discussions that emerged from these sessions were just fascinating, and it was just great to hear people's investment in the work. You know, we had one artist for the last couple of years who had a play called Cry Havoc, a solo show. He's an Army veteran who became an actor and studied Shakespeare to cope with his PTSD. He found it a really energizing and both energizing and settling way to cope with his trauma, and then began a program to teach other vets how to cope with their PTSD through Shakespeare and storytelling. It's a remarkable guy. And as part of his show, he already had a kind of a talkback built in, you know, and he started out by asking people who served, asking people who had family who served, and worked into just sharing a lot of stories about veterans that he's worked with. And you know, you're sitting next to people that you may know or not know who start to share these very personal stories of people who had served that were family members or loved ones who struggled, some who committed suicide, you know, some who are homeless, and it was just a powerful way to honor those people and to learn these stories from folks in our community, you know. So that kind of thing started to happen, and we said, wow, this is really something we want to continue doing.
I've been to a couple of talkbacks. Mass Appeal was staged at the No Theater in Binghamton a couple of years ago, and a local priest came and helped lead the talkback. And then the actors who have lived into these roles, I bet they have a little bit of a difficulty separating themselves from the role, but often can speak for the playwright, who's generally not there.
Yes.
But I think it does help us process. It would be like reading a book and wanting to ask the author a few questions.
Yes.
And I've noticed that now some of the books that I'm reading have discussion questions at the end, or the author has made some notes that help you use the book in a wider circle.
Yes.
So
we will. I should mention have the playwright at the talkback on the 26th, that
wonderful.
Last Friday.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. No, I want to give franklinstagecompany.org.
Yes.
Because I went there to check out a few things. You can also Google Harriet Powell and see the ad that was placed to find her with the $200 reward and a lot of information about her.
Yes.
The placing of these ads cost the owners of the slaves some money, but it was so important to get that person back.
Yes, and the fugitive slave law was in effect.
Yes.
So you could come north. Yep.
Looking,
and in fact, Kyle told me that after this incident of Harriet escaping, her owner's name was Davenport. Davenport became a very vocal supporter of making the fugitive slave laws even more harsh. And that's what happened in the 1850s. So this was the 1839, and then there was that one set of fugitive slave laws. And then there was yet a second set of fugitive slave laws that I think criminalized not returning. Do you know what I mean? They just made it worse.
Yes, right. But we're talking about an episode that took place 180 years ago. But as you say, the play is still significant today. The story is still one that needs to be told. And again, it's the story of Harriet Powell, young mixed race enslaved woman slipping away from a hotel in Syracuse. The Franklin Stage Company, you can afford to go to this play.
You can.
It takes you an hour to drive to Franklin, but once you're there, you can walk into the theater with reservations.
Yes, please reserve. We're actually starting to fill up for Harriet early, which is great. We've got some groups coming. Yeah. Very exciting.
How many seats do you have?
We have 120 seats. So.
And my point was that it's free.
It is. We don't charge admission.
But it is helpful to make a donation.
It is. We have a suggested donation of $20, but if that doesn't fit in your budget, you're welcome anyway, of course. Yeah. It's was part of the mission and I guess part of the vision of the founders to make quality professional theater accessible to our community. So we carry on that tradition.
Yeah. And the actors, once again, are Actors Equity for the most, well, these 4, I guess, are.
2 are, and 2 are what's called equity membership candidates, which means they have been in professional equity shows and are earning points towards their union card. So we're happy to support them.
And what I had heard was that some of the actors come, many of them are based in New York.
Yes, all 4 of these actors are.
Yeah, so they have certainly a community. I'm familiar with some of the actors in New York and the community that's based there, and how you could be in a wonderful play and it might be quite successful, and then it closes and you go back to the cattle calls, you go back to walking the streets, you go back to doing a production for a car, you know. So I have great respect for the field.
I do too. And when we were approaching actors for the roles in this show, I said, and I often say, because they're so talented and committed and professional, the first thing I say is, we can't afford to pay you anything close to what you're worth. But we have this remarkable theater, this amazing historical building, this supportive community, this bucolic, a breathtaking location, and this amazing play. Yeah. So that's what we have. Truth.
It's certainly going to be worth the drive. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Once again, on Encounter today, our guest has been Leslie Noble, who is the director of Possessing Harriet, and also a part of the Franklin Stage Company. FranklinStageCompany.org will give you information about how to find the theater, which is in a historic building, which is worth seeing in itself.
Oh, yeah.
And perhaps I'll see you there. But Leslie, thank you so much for coming to Johnson City, to our studio.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
And thank you for viewing and listening to our program today. Thanks to the Broome County Council of Churches, of course, for putting the program together and producing it and paying me my huge wage. I'm a volunteer. And our thanks to WBNG TV for the studio and for the Town Square Media radio stations for carrying our audio track. I'm Jeff Kellam, inviting you in the coming week to be gentle with people and with yourself.